This morning, I've entitled my message, "You Are Here for a Reason." And I want to begin by asking this question. What are we here for? It's a question that we've all raised at some point or another. And maybe you're finding yourself asking this same question now. Maybe this morning you're feeling a little lost as you're searching for purpose in life. But I'm here to tell you that you are here for a reason. You're not a mistake. You're not an accident. And God has a plan for you. In Jeremiah 29:11, it says this, "I say this because I know what I am planning for you, says the Lord. I have good plans for you, not plans to hurt you. I will give you hope and a good future." I would like to ask you some questions this morning. Now, you don't need to answer them out loud, but think about them as I read them. The first is this: what do you think your purpose is here on earth? What do you think your purpose is here on earth? Number two, how does knowing that God has a plan for your life make you feel? Does it make you feel good? Does it make you feel anxious, worried? How does knowing that God has a plan for your life make you feel? Number three, since God has a plan for you, why doesn't He come right out and tell you exactly what it is? That would be most simple, wouldn't it? If God just said, "Okay, John, here it is. This is my plan for you." And then number four, how can you figure out what God's plan is for your life? If God has a plan for your life, and I believe that He does, how do you figure out what God's plan actually is? This morning, I'd like to explore some of these questions and hopefully leave you with a few answers by the time we're finished. The first question for us to consider is this, and this is my first point this morning. Does God have a plan for your life? Does He have a purpose for your life? I believe the answer is clearly yes. This is brought out in Psalms 139, verses 13 through 18. The psalmist writes and he says, "You made all the delicate inner parts of my body and knit me together in my mother's womb. Thank you for making me so wonderfully complex. Your workmanship is marvelous, and how well I know it. You watched me as I was being formed in utter seclusion, as I was woven together in the dark of the womb. You saw me before I was born." And then notice this next sentence. "All the days planned for me were written in your book before I was 1 day old." God, your thoughts are precious to me. They are so many. If I could count them, they would be more than all the grains of sand. When I wake up, I am still with you. The author here in Psalms talks about how he was wonderfully created, how God made him and knit him together in his mother's womb. And then did you notice that part there that says, "All the days planned for me were written in your book before I was even 1 day old." God loves you. God has a plan for your life. It's not that God is trying to force you to do something, but He wants you to serve Him. It's not so different than it is for us as parents, right? When we have our child and we look at our child and we wonder what kind of potential they have and what they're going to achieve with their life. And we want what's very best for them, don't we? And so we encourage them to pursue things in such a way that they aren't disqualified from choices later on in life. You know what I'm saying. Get good grades in school, learn to be respectful and obedient. Those are all life skills that will help them later on in life and won't disqualify them from things that they want to do. So we hold out that for our kids because we want what's best for them, right? I hope so anyway. I did for my kids. And you hold out that hope or that anticipation for them, but understand that they're going to make their own choices. And sometimes our kids make choices that we hope they wouldn't make. And because of that choice, it may disqualify them from certain things that they would have done or could have done. Right? There are things that are very easy for me. It's very easy for me to get up in public and speak in front of people. My wife, it would make her physically ill. She just doesn't like that at all. But there's other things that I struggle with. For me, math is my kryptonite. I mean, I can do basic math. That's easy. That's fine. Balance a checkbook. But when you start adding alphabet to math, then that's when I start having problems, right? There's a lot of things that I could have done with my life. Being an engineer is probably not one of them, because you have to have really strong math skills in order to be an engineer. Sometimes the choices that we make disqualify us from things that we would possibly have wanted to do, right? Since my math grades were not super stellar, engineering was never really an opportunity for me. But there are other choices that we can make, choices that maybe we made some poor decisions, and now being a law enforcement officer is not really on the plate either, right? And so we hold out the very best that we hope that our kids can be, and sometimes when that no longer becomes an option, we try to hold out the next best thing. And I think God's like that too. God wants what's very best for us, and so he holds out that possibility, that opportunity for us, and sometimes because of some of the decisions that we make, that no longer becomes possible. And so then God holds out the next best thing for us. But because he's given us free will, because he's given us free choice, we can choose things that end up not being such good choices for us. But God does have a plan for us. There's a clip that I'd like to share this morning that brings out how God has gifted and made you to carry out his plan for your life. We'll see a man by the name of Chip Ingram that talks about passion. But as you watch, I want you to focus on how God uses your talents, gifts, experiences, and passions to bring about his purpose for your life. So hopefully we'll have that right now.
139, it says, when God looks at you, you're fearfully and wonderfully made. You're unique. You have certain spiritual gifts, certain passions, abilities that comes through a personality. And then he literally allowed. He didn't cause, but he allowed all the experiences you have. And he says, as you surrender to him and say, I want you to take all that and filter it through your will, use me. Passions aren't always super spiritual. I have a passion to play basketball. I played in college. I played overseas. I'm 46 years old. I still play. I'm passionate about basketball. Basketball took me around the world sharing Christ. Basketball is where I met my closest friends. It's just who I don't think it's good, bad. It's me. It's a button.
I thought it was interesting that Chip brought out how our interests and our passions don't have to be super spiritual in order for God to use them for his glory. Just like how God was able to use Chip's passion for basketball to share Jesus with others. Gavin's done kind of the same thing. He's used his sports stuff to reach out to fellow athletes about Jesus Christ. He started Bible studies that they've attended. We're proud of you, Gavin. And we think that you're doing a really great job. But you see how for Chip, he used something that we wouldn't think of basketball as being something super spiritual, but how he was able to use it, this passion that God gave him, to reach out to other people in ways that maybe they wouldn't have listened otherwise. That brings us to our next question. If God has a plan for my life, why doesn't he just come right out and tell me exactly what it is? So why doesn't God tell me what his plan is for my life? Well, sometimes he does. If you look at Jeremiah, for example, in Jeremiah chapter 1, verses 4 and 5, it says this, "The Lord gave me a message. He said, I knew you before I formed you in your mother's womb. Before you were born, I set you apart and appointed you as my spokesman to the world." Sometimes God's clear about the plans that he has for your life. But more often, God is less clear. Perhaps one reason for that is because we don't really want to know what God's plan is. I can honestly say that there has never been a time in my life where I ever thought that I would not be a preacher. My mom and dad, from the time that they found out that they were going to have a baby boy, prayed that they would give him back to the Lord. And I can honestly say, as I look back over my life, that there was never a time when I didn't think that I would be a preacher. I think that that was the calling that God gave to me. It's not usually that clear for people. There's a lot of people that spend their life searching for what it is that God really wants them to do. And sometimes God tells us exactly what he wants. Sometimes he allows us to search for it. Sometimes he allows us to say no, and sometimes he doesn't. Do you remember Moses at the burning bush? God spent, I think this is interesting, because the Bible tells us that Moses' life breaks down into 3 40-year periods. He spent 40 years in Egypt. He spent 40 years out in Midian taking care of sheep. And then he spent 40 years leading the Israelite people to the promised land. Right? So when Moses sees the burning bush, he is like 80 years old. Right? And so God calls him and he says, Moses, I've got a job for you. I want you to lead my people out of Pharaoh's hand. And Moses is like, yeah, well, I think you should find somebody else for that. Right? I mean, God has spent 80 years preparing Moses for this job. The first 40 years, he got the education of one of Pharaoh's, children. He got the very best education that the world had to offer. He spends the next 40 years in the wilderness taking care of sheep. Now, sometimes it insults my sensibilities to be compared to sheep, right? Because sheep are dumb. They're not very smart, right? You've heard that old saying, if you have 100 sheep and one jumps off a cliff, how many sheep do you have left? 0, because the other 99 are going to follow the first one, right? But Moses learned how to take care of, these sheep in the wilderness, how to look for water, how to, take care of helpless things that, like what he was going to do for the last 40 years of his life, right? Except instead of being sheep, it was going to be people. And yet when God called him, Moses was like, have you seen my brother Aaron? I think you need to go talk to him, right? He can sing like an angel, talk like a preacher. Lord, just use him. And we see how well it worked out at Mount Sinai. Moses was gone 40 days and Aaron was building the golden calf, right? God's way is usually best. Sometimes God doesn't come right out and tell us what his will is because he knows that we're not looking. And sometimes when we know, we just tend to rebel, don't we? Like, did you ever have a sibling, an older sibling, try to tell you what to do? And what's your first response? You're not the boss of me, right? So this is kind of a funny thing. When this has been years and years ago, we were at my brother-in-law and sister's house, and we're walking into the house, and so my brother-in-law goes to Tyler. Some of you guys know Tyler, right? He says to Tyler, I want you to do this. Tyler turns to Austin, his younger brother, says, Austin, you need to do this. Tyler turned to Andrew and says, Andrew, go do that. Andrew turns around, there's nobody left. So Andrew is the one who ends up doing it. We don't like people telling us what to do, even if it's God. But God does have a plan for our life. There's 3 things here that we need to know. Sometimes we don't want to know what God's plan is. After all, once we know, there's a call to make it happen. For many of us, it's easier not to know than to live up to what God expects of us. Remember the saying, ignorance is bliss? A second reason is we don't like to be told what to do. How many of us have chosen not to do something simply because we knew it was expected of us? We might not like to admit it, but there's a stubborn streak in many of us. And thirdly, it means more to us if it isn't given to us. How many of you knew somebody, I do, who got everything that they ever wanted handed to them? If you know somebody like that, did they really appreciate the things that they had? No. When I was a kid, there was another kid that was in my class that they were much more wealthy than we were. And I don't know if any of you remember when those handheld games became really popular, the Mattel games, like the football and the basketball and the sub chase and all of the different ones that they had. They were like super, super popular, and my friend got like all of them one year. The thing is that a lot of times I could get stuff from him like later for next to nothing because he was already tired of it and moved on. Because he didn't really appreciate it because it was all given to him. For those of us who had to work for the things that we had, we tended to take care of them and appreciate them a little more, didn't we? And sometimes I think that God allows us to search a little bit because that if we have to invest some effort into the search for God's plan for our life, that it will mean more to us and it will bring us closer to Him. Finally, we come to the question, how can you figure out what God's will is for your life? So how do you figure out what God's plan is for your life? I have a second clip that I'd like to show you this morning. Again, that clip deals with passion. But as you watch it, I want you to watch it from the perspective of finding God's plan for your life.
Sooner or later, there's got to be this action point. There has to be a step. And I think the step is to say, God, open my eyes to see. And when I see, there'll be something that comes across the screen that matches my gifts, my abilities, the things I'm good at. The thing I would challenge people to do is to pray, God, let me see what you see. There's an opportunity right now for us to use the gifts we have, our unique abilities, our talents, the things God has entrusted to us right now to do something that nobody else could do.
The God of the universe that made you, if He put a passion inside of you, it just seems pretty logical to ask Him, what is it? I think the second thing is do a little history. Your passion probably is not going to come onto the screen of your life unrelated. And once you start looking at your history, what do you enjoy doing the most? What are your gifts and strengths? Your passion is going to fit in somewhere out of your history. It's going to flow out of your gifts. And there's going to be this something that is the thread, which is your passion, that connects them all. That when you know it, when you do it, something starts to go inside. Something just, no one has to tell you to get ready, you got to do this. It's just, your temperature goes up, your heart rate goes up, your voice gets more intense.
The first thing that they said was to pray for opportunities. To pray for opportunities. Louis Giglio, who is the first guy on the second clip there, said that we need to pray that God will open up our eyes to the opportunities that are right in front of us. He says that there will be something that comes along across the screen that matches our gifts, our abilities, something I'm good at. The thing I would challenge people to do is to pray, God, let me see what you see. There are opportunities right now to use the gifts that we have, our unique abilities, our talents, the things that God has entrusted to us right now to do something that nobody else can do. The other thing that I would say is this, is so many times we want God to do what we want, right? So we have these great ideas that we think that God should do, when perhaps what we should be doing is looking to see what God is already doing around us and see how we can become a part of what God is already doing. Do you see the difference? Instead of me trying to get God to come aboard what I want him to do, I look around to see what God is doing and I join him. Which one do you think is going to be more successful, the first or the second? The second thing that Chip shared with us was to examine your history. God's plan for your life isn't going to come out of nowhere. It will be an expression or outgrowth of your talents, interests, and gifts. So Chip says to examine your history. He says, what do you enjoy doing the most? What are your gifts and strengths? Your passion or your purpose is going to fit in somewhere out of your history. It's going to flow out of your gifts. And there's going to be something that is the thread, which is your passion, that connects them all. As you look at yourself and you take stock of your life, what are your passions? What are the things that you enjoy and are really good at? Maybe you love children. You're great with kids, and you really enjoy being around them. If that's the case, God's purpose for your life in regard to his kingdom may involve children's ministry. Perhaps you're a good listener, or maybe you love to be around people. Perhaps God's plan for you, at least in regard to his kingdom, may be a ministry to people, especially ones that are lonely and hurting. Do you see where I'm going? It could be that your niche in God's kingdom is handling technology, like the sound system or video. Or maybe it's taking care of the maintenance of his building. Once you've determined what your gifts and passions are, it becomes much easier to allow God to use you in his service. God wired you the way that you are for a purpose. You're not a mistake, and God has a plan, especially for you. The third and final thing that we need to do is get busy. You know, the hard part is not really determining God's plan for your life. The really hard part is putting that plan into action. We seem to come up with so many other things that seem to demand our time and our attention. But I'll leave you with that last thought. We need to get busy. There's never been a greater need to share Jesus than there is today. You know, I look at people who don't have Jesus, and I see the struggle that they have. And for me, sometimes, to be honest, it's a little hard for me to understand because I don't have their perspective. Because I'm really fortunate. I'm really, really lucky. I grew up in a Christian home where my mom and dad loved each other. and they loved us. I grew up in a good church where I was preached the gospel message, and I was taught about Jesus Christ and God and who He is and His character. And because of that, I was able to make some pretty good decisions, right? I chose a great spouse. Not only is she beautiful, but she's good for me, right? She's a good listener where I'm not so great. You know, she balances me. And so, you know, I never did drugs. I never was an alcoholic. I never struggled with some of these other things. And I've lived a very, very blessed life, right? And I'm not bragging. The reason that I say that is it makes it harder for me to understand when people have really, really struggled. It's not that I don't want to understand. It's just that my life experience has been very different. And so for people that have found Jesus after they have struggled, the honest truth is a lot of them are much more grateful because they know what they have and they know where they've come from. And maybe if you're that person, you have an ability to reach people in a way that I can't. Because you understand the struggle in a way that I can't. Now, I'm not sorry that I haven't had those struggles. Don't misunderstand me. I'm very grateful that I had a great family growing up and people that loved me and cared about me and you know, a good support system. But maybe God is able to use you to reach people who are struggling because you used to be there yourself. Look at your talents and your abilities and ask God, how can you use those for your glory? How can you use those for your kingdom? And then get busy.